Uh, Today we're at Waurika, Oklahoma, interviewing at the Methodist Church in Waurika. We have several old-timers here. The one that I am interviewing for the Oklahoma Historical Society and the Living Legends is Mrs. Ina A Webb, and that's spelled W-E-B-B, Webb. This is Mary B. Roberts, the interviewer. Mrs. Webb was born right near here, the town just above, just north of us, on 81, called Addington. I'm going to let you tell us about her early times in Indian Territory, when she was born, her age, and so on.
Well, I was born in a log cabin just south of Addington, September the 15th, 1898. And my father was a farmer at that time. And we moved into Addington in 1900. And at that time, my father began doing little odd jobs, like he run a gin, and then later on he had a business there in Addington. And
your father's name was?
My father's name was Crawford C. McLemore.
Would you spell that last name?
Capital M-C, capital L-E-M-O-R-E.
And he married your mother, whose name was Allie
Hedrick, H-E-A-D-R-I-C-K.
And she's from Illinois?
She was born in Illinois. My father was born in Missouri.
And they met in Oklahoma?
They met in Oklahoma.
And were married at Ryan?
Oklahoma.
Ryan,
uh-huh.
How many children were there?
2.
A girl and a boy?
And a boy.
A girl and a boy. I wonder if you could tell us something of your father's farm work. What crops did he grow?
Well, mostly cotton. Probably grew corn and stuff, or maybe to feed the stock. Mm-hmm. But cotton was our cash crop. Mm-hmm. And we picked it by hand, of course. And my father would have to take it to Ryan, which is 20 miles south of where we live, to have it ginned. And back in those days, it was a full day's journey, the 20 miles. But then later on, then we moved into Addington.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was a kind of a family business then, wasn't it? The cotton hoeing, and then again...
Well, if you didn't have any children, it was kind of hard to... I suppose that my mother did farm work, helped my daddy in the field. Now, I'm not sure, but...
Now, they talk about cotton chopping. What was that?
Well, that was where you go through with your hoe and you chop out the weeds, and then you thin the cotton and leave it so many inches or so many feet apart, you see.
Mm-hmm. So you thinned it at the same time that you cleaned it.
Right.
And then the cotton picking was done with, you said, with big backs.
Yes, we'd make big long sacks about 6 foot long and made a strap, and you put it over your shoulder and went down the rows and picked this. Now, you didn't pull the burr, you put the cotton out of the burr.
Yeah. Was that kind of rough on the hands?
Well, yes.
Did the smaller children have their little sacks and work too?
Well, my brother and I never did.
You didn't?
No.
I had seen some children, I can recall when some children did do farm work. Well, how was the school regulated by that?
Well, in later years, when there was an awful lot, a big cotton crop, they would dismiss school for maybe a couple of weeks or 3 weeks or something in the fall, mm-hmm. for people to gather their crops.
Mm-hmm. Now, was that before statehood still, or
no,
after?
That was after statehood. That was up in
Tell us something about your first day at school, or your first schoolhouse, and so on.
Well, my first schoolhouse was in 1900. Joe Huffer came to Addington and put in a drugstore where the little Marquette now stands in Addington. And he stayed in that drugstore 1 year and then moved into another building. And the Baptist church, our Baptist church, was organized in that little building in 1902. And that is the first school building that I ever went into, was in the Baptist church. And I suppose that it was something kind of like our kindergartens are today.
Probably.
Then from that, why?
Was there a public school then organized
Yes.
above that?
Yes,
And tell us something about the public education of that day. Your schoolhouse and community.
I can remember, see, back, I would have been, I suppose about the first year I went to school 5 or 6, you know, like that. And then I really don't remember for a few years in there that's kind of vaguely, vaguely remember. But then I remember when I was, probably 10 or 12 years old, our public school building burned down. And I went to school then. If you know where the old green garage building is in Addington, it's on Main Street going north. I went to school there probably in the 2nd or 3rd grade while they were rebuilding the schoolhouse. And then
the schoolhouse was built more like the modern times, I guess.
oh, now they are. I mean, and then we had they built a 2-story building, and it burned down. Then we built a modern building all on ground floor, and it burned down.
That's 3 fires.
And then the last building, of course, our school was disbanded in 1960, and that building burned down.
The 4th one. But where is the Addington children now are bused into a school?
Into Comanche and Waurika.
Was there a sort of a uniting of your school and the Waurika schools?
Well, at the time that our school disbanded, part of our children wanted to go to Comanche and part of it wanted to go to Waurika. So the state board of education, I suppose, came in there and blocked it off where each child would go. And my family and my children happened to get in Comanche School District.
Was it a very hard trip to Comanche?
No, it's only 10 miles.
You went by bus?
Yes, the bus picks the children up in front of their house.
Then that was, part of it was consolidated with Comanche and part of it with Waurika on it. Do you remember any of the happenings of the schools in those early days? Anything peculiar of the way of teaching or the curriculum, what they taught?
Well, of course, in later years, there was lots of sports.
Yes. And did you have those in your school?
We had basketball in our school, and our boys won the state championship.
What year?
Well, let's see.
I remember Comanche used to have some awfully good teams.
Well, this was while we were still in Addington.
Oh, it's Addington that won
We
it.
won the state championship at Addington. And it's been, it was in about 48 or 49, let's see.
Before you really consolidated with the other school then.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. What were some of the subjects that you liked best?
Well, I wasn't particularly interested in history.
You weren't.
I liked, well, we called it grammar back in those schools, you know. In those days was grammar. And I liked geometry. I didn't care for algebra because I never could find what A equaled. But, you know, we had reading and writing and arithmetic. That was just about the...
What were some of your extra activities outside of school hours? What'd you do?
Well, we had no way to go very many places, you know, back in those days. So we didn't have very many activities except just what we could plan right there at home, you know, like parties and things like that, you know.
What kind of parties did you have?
Oh, we had them where you spin the bottle, you know. You know, that's very interesting, where you kiss the girl.
Spin the bottle. I hadn't heard of that one.
Oh, yeah. And,
it's the way the bottle stops as you spin it.
yeah, where it's
And it turned towards a certain girl.
and you
Is
got
that
to
it?
kiss her, yeah.
Oh. Sounds like an interesting game.
Oh, yeah.
And what else? You mentioned the Baptist church, and I believe the Baptist and the Methodist churches did not have dancing at that time.
No.
So you evidently, your activities were outdoor activities and
Yes.
picnics and...
Yes, we had a building there, recreational building, and had this big hall in it, and we could have our tacky parties and box suppers and things like that.
And now that was church supervised.
Well, not necessarily.
That you could just go in there and have...
You know, That was not in the church. It was in another building. And church supervised a lot. We had box suppers to raise money for, you know, things
Pie
like that.
suppers,
Yeah.
ice cream social.
Yeah. All of that, you know, for raise money for our church.
When did your father move into town?
1900. I was just 2 years old when we moved into town.
Oh. Then you wouldn't remember very much about the difference in the farming implements and things like that then.
Well, you mean from the time...
Then and today.
Oh, yes. Back in those days, you had a team of horses or an old mule, you know, and you'd hitch them to this cultivator and go down the rows, you know, and things like that. Well, now, in later years, they have the tractors. They have all of that stuff that you don't have to, no manual labor to it to mount anything. Now they have cotton pickers. So cotton pickers by hand is almost out because they have the cotton pickers now that
The machines that go through
picks the cotton.
and is the cotton pretty clean when it's done? I mean by that,
Well,
how do they keep from getting the burrs in with the...
well, you do get the burrs, but then when you take it to the gin, why, that cleans the cotton.
They have means of handling it.
Yes.
Did you have any types of literary societies or clubs or...
No, back when I was, probably 15, 16, 17, something like that, we had I guess you'd call it a club. It was SOPH, and that meant some old pecked hen. That was the name of our club. And we were just teenagers, you know, but that was what it was.
Where did you get that name?
I don't know. But they was, you know, we had quite a few numbers. We had our meetings and all, you know.
I've heard of a good many of those older clubs way back, but that's a new one.
Well, that was what ours was.
Do you recall your experiences, for instance, with reading libraries and things like that?
Well, we had a big library in our school. And then in later years we had one in our church.
Tell us something about the churches that were organized as they came in.
Well, our church, our Baptist church,
Was that the first one?
was Addington Baptist Church. It's the only one there is in Addington. And it was organized in 1902, January of 1902.
It was.
And it was, as I said before, on the corner where the market now stands. And then in 1928, we moved about 2 blocks east and built a brick church, which we now use. We built it in 1928.
Do you remember the types of services that you had then as compared to the way you worship now?
Well,
Has it changed much?
well, not a great deal. I don't think.
Do you have a choir that rehearses or
No.
is paid or?
No. We don't.
Still have
Of course, our church is small.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have. I think we have 60 enrolled in Sunday school. Very small church. But back when I went to church, first began going to church in the old church, Brother Huffer, he was preacher, Sunday school superintendent, Sunday school teacher, led the singing and everything. Back, when I was 8 or 9, 10 years old, he was everything at the church at that time. And I can remember the old church just as well as you walked in and our stage or platform or whatever was just about in front of our vestibule, So on Sunday morning when we'd get ready to sing, now his daughter, Mrs. Edmondson, played the piano. And she played by ear. She could play anything in the world,
Which Edmondson
Lloyd.
is that? That's no kin to the Edmondsons of the governor.
No. And when we'd go to sing, of course, we always had to go up to the front to sing, And he'd say, now, I want you to toe this mark. Our floors was wood floors, and had seams in them. He said, now, I want you to toe this mark. And we had to stand on that straight mark.
Now, those were the children, when the children sang. Was
Well, no, even
the choir?
teenagers. Well, we didn't really have a choir.
Uh-huh.
We'd sing, but we really didn't call it a choir back in those days.
The church today in the Methodist Church is much more formal than it was then.
Well, now our church is not formal.
I suppose in smaller places it hasn't been the change that we have had in the city.
We have nothing cut and dried in our church. We just.
How do you raise the funds for your ministers?
Oh, we have no trouble in our little church because we have so many people to tithe.
Just tithing. Well, that's wonderful. So you don't have to take up collections
We take up a collection on Sunday morning. That's all.
But you don't make pledges and
No.
it's
We
just
have,
it's a free will offering then.
That's right. During our Sunday school hour, we put in our church offering and everything in our envelopes on Sunday morning, and it's turned in. Well, then a lot of members come in late, or not there for Sunday school, so we take up an offering so they can participate, right?
And do you meet expenses all right?
Oh, yes.
That's wonderful.
In our church, we
We're
have...
just free will giving. Do you recall the town doctor in your days?
Dr. Murphy. And he made house calls, of course, to the country and miles out in the country. And he had this one-horse buggy, I suppose what you call it. And his horse was named Jargo. Jargo is what he... And it was a great big horse, and it just kind of jogged along, And but Dr. Murphy made all of these house calls, and I'm sure that he has gone and never got any pay for his services.
I'm sure so.
You know, because he'd go to the country.
But how did you send for him? How did you notify him?
Well,
Telephone?
Go get him.
You had to go get him.
Well, no, there was few telephones, you know, back in those days, I think.
What did you do with emergencies, and what were some of them?
Well, if there was an emergency, we'd either have to go to Duncan or to Waurika for, like a broken arm or anything like that, because he was just a medical doctor. And we'd have to go to Duncan or to Waurika, somewhere else, you know, for...
He didn't do any work like that in the home then?
No.
So many times, you know, they did, just the
Yes.
kitchen table,
No,
they had to.
he did not. We had to go to other places for...
But he delivered the babies in the home.
Yeah, he delivered the babies. He delivered my first one, I guess all of them, in fact. But my oldest child is 61 years old, and he delivered him
At home.
at home. All of my children, which is 8.
Well, didn't the neighbors help each other at times like that? And
Well, yes, they'd come in, you know, and help. And but all of my children, as I said, I have 8, were born in the home, except one. And at the time that he was born, he's now 45. I had a daughter in the hospital that had surgery on her head. And I just happened to be up there visiting her when
the baby
and he was the only one that was there. He was born in the Patterson Hospital in Duncan.
Well,
And the rest of them are all homemade.
Your 8 children, I believe we haven't introduced your husband yet.
Tell us about to get him in, hadn't we?
We'd better find out something about that.
Webb. Yes, Roy Webb. Well, he came from, he was born and raised in Tula, Mississippi, and came to Addington, and I happened to be working on telephone office switchboard that day. He came in, and he came up to where I was working and asked me to call this Moody Franklin that I told you that he worked for, and asked me to call him and have him come in and get him. He was going to work for him, you see, on the ranch. And that's where I met him. And then we were married in 1917.
That was pretty fast work, wasn't it?
Oh, a year!
Tell us something about his, what was considered the job on the ranch then.
Oh, well, now they would call it a flunky job. You know what flunky is, you know, just to do anything there was to do. Well, that's what he did. He was
handyman.
Cows, yes, or just anything there was to do on the farm, you know.
And as you remarked a while ago, they didn't have milking machines
No, they
then.
didn't have milking machines, right.
Do you recall any of your early experiences in your early married life that you could tell us? They're so different today with the
Yes, well,
luxuries that people have.
When Roy and I married, he was making $20 a week.
That's pretty good.
And we moved into an upstairs apartment there in Addington with another couple. It was kind of duplex, what you'd call a duplex, you know, and moved in with this other couple. And at the time, it was, you know, I had been raised in a grocery store. I had everything that there was in the stores, which is not as nearly as much as there is now. But when we moved up there with this other couple, they were young, and it was so funny at the time, would eat so many salmon cooked with onions. I said, I had never heard of anything like that, you know. Well, now you can't afford salmon. You know, it's too expensive. And then we lived there about, probably 8 or 9 months, and then we built us a little house down next to Mama's and Daddy's.
Now, you were born in a log cabin,
Right.
but this was a regular
Yeah,
home.
it was a regular home.
Can you recall anything in the community in the way of, an epidemic and
Yes.
where...
In 1918, that was during the war, we had flu epidemic.
That was
And
worldwide.
I think that there was about, I know that of one family, the Rowe family, west of Addington, that lost 4 in their family. And then I know a family that just lived, 2 or 3 doors from where I lived, the Adkins family, and they lost 3.
Was there much panic about that, or did you go on in and help each other anyway?
No, people just had to go in and help other people regardless of your fear or whatnot,
Right.
you know.
Well, it seemed to just be in the air anyhow.
Yes.
You took it whether you went or not.
That's right. No, people went in, but then back then, you dug graves by hand. You remember? And I tell you, the people just had to work almost day and night to get the graves dug, you know, because they didn't have these things they have now to do that.
And you had just one minister to bury them?
Probably. Well, no, they might have been. Back in those days, they were country ministers. You know.
They came around.
Yeah,
That's right.
I don't know if they were, of course we're Southern Baptists, and I don't know if they were Southern Baptists or if they were even ordained. They might have just been licensed preachers, but they were there close to town, you know, lived out.
There was such a tremendous loss of life all over the United States, well, all over the world, I guess, with that flu epidemic. And the ones that had it and escaped, some of them were left with chest difficulties and so on.
I don't know of anybody, you know, there at home that was that way, but I'm sure they were around. But we were very, very fortunate we did not have it, none of our family.
We've never found out why it hit some homes so hard and then others were not touched. We've never found out, have we?
I don't know. As I said, the one that lost 4 and then the one that lost 3, they were no different to mine or yours or anybody else's home. And
Same water, same streets, and so on. It's been a mystery. Do you recall any disasters of your little towns, like tornadoes or bad storms or floods or something?
No, I don't think. Now, we had one little tornado there one time.
I believe Ryan had one.
But it did very little damage, just a few little outhouses or something like that. It didn't do any great damage, no. But our town burned up at one time.
The entire town?
The west, well, you know, Addington's right on 81. And the west side burned down at one time, all of it burned.
How many buildings?
Oh, they must have been 12 or 15.
How did it start?
Nobody ever seemed to know. Then they built the brick ones back that we have now.
Did it start kind of in the middle and then burn both ways, or did you have any means of fighting it?
No, we had no means of fighting it. It just,
Just the bucket brigade.
that's right. And there was nothing you could do about it. So it all burned down. And then
Did your father have his grocery store at that time? And it went?
It went too.
It's been an awful loss.
But,
And the town built back up.
yes, See, in about I'll say 1924, 25, somewhere along there, we had a population of about 1,500 people in Addington. Now we have maybe 150.
I see.
But it's just gradually gone down from that time to now. And I was sitting there the other night. I just picked up a pencil and a piece of paper and just jotted down how many houses that I could remember that had been either burned up or moved or just let fall, you know, dilapidate or whatever you want to call it, you know. And they was somewhere around 30.
Well, I did.
that had been moved and burned and, you know,
Lost, anyway.
lost. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you recall any particular thing of interest about your children in their growing up?
Well, you know, there is no two children alike. So I said I had 8. I had 5 girls and 3 boys. Well, I had a boy that was, I mean, high-tempered, or quick-tempered, I might add. And when he was little, you know, there is not much you can do for a real stubborn child. Because you could punish them, and they're still going to hold out. And this one boy of mine, when he was, 10 or 12 years old, I guess, then we had these wooden doors, and they had 2 panels, you know, had this thing down the middle and then a panel on each side. Well, he was laying on the floor, and something didn't go right, so he just kicked the door, kicked the panel out the door, you know. Then he was, as I said, high-tempered. So then we had an old pickup. My father, well, my stepfather, I'll put it that way, was a Baptist preacher. And he and my mother lived close to me and my family. And my stepfather had this old pickup. So Jerry decided he'd drive it down to the creek one day for something, you know, I don't know what. Well, he got down there, all right, started home, it wouldn't start, and he kicked the windshield out. Well, I'd say they had no temper. You know, everything just went along just so with them. But this one, he was born, he was the one that was born in the hospital. And my sister-in-law's mother told me one time, she said, Ina, you got the wrong baby. Said, Jerry never did belong to you. Sometimes I wondered if he did. But there is no 2 out of my 8. There's no 2 that's exactly alike, you know.
That's right. What have they done? What are their interests?
Well, now, my oldest son, Roy Webb in Eddington, works for Halliburton. Has been there 30 years. And my next son, Pat Webb, works for Sunray. There, he's been there for 12, 15 years. And Jerry, the one that I was telling you about, he married when he was 19, or he was 19 in October. Married in February, went into the Army in May, drafted. They moved him to El Paso, and on the 15th day of November, he and Peggy had a little baby. 9 months and 10 days, they said. Anyway, he went to school some, tried to go to college, but now he is lives in Houston, and he is district manager, has been for Wellex for, well, ever since he came out of the Army, about 54, something like that.
But his temper hasn't set him back so much.
His wife told me that she had, that temper had slowed down since she'd had him.
I see, the wife helped. Well, do you have anything particular that you would like to tell us now?
Well, no, unless you want to know something about the town. I mean, buildings or the...
Yes, I'd like to have anything that you have of interest.
Well, at one time, I believe I told you that we had on the south end, we had a department store. Well, at that time, it was called a general store back then.
What all did you have in that?
Everything. I mean, you know, just what you'd go in a department store and find. I mean, well, it would be, of course, department stores now have, one of them has ladies' furnishings and all that and this, that, and the other. But this had everything. From a grocery store to a hardware store and, you know, everything in it.
I see.
Then we had a
Grocery stores to the horse collars.
right, and then we had there was a small bakery there. Then we had a cleaning shop and a picture show. Now that was back when it was.
About what year was this?
Well, I was a teenager because I very well remember that. This boy.
You're 81 now, so that must have been about...
about 65 years ago. That I went with this boy that run the bakery. Earl Brown was his name. That's the reason I remember that so well. And then we had 2 lumber yards. Mr. Dick McKinney run one of them. And the other one was a Kendall. It was a branch of the Kendall Flint, but they just left the Flint off, and it was the Kendall lumber yard there. And we had 3 gyms. Now back when years before that, we had a brickyard there.
Oh.
And then we had 3 gyms. One of them was electric. Now we thought we was right uptown when we got an electric gym, you know. And then we had, of course, the trains run, you know how the trains run back. In those days, they'd be 4 or 5 a day, you know, going each way, you know. And we had the depot, which was a whole...
What line was it?
Rock Island.
Rock Island.
And that was a hanging out place for the kids, you know. We'd go down and see the trains come through, you know. And we had butcher shops, cafes, and we called them ice cream parlors back then, you know. Had 2 banks, had a real estate office.
But how long before oil came in around here?
Oil came in there in, probably around 1920 or something like that.
Where was your discovery as well?
Up north of Addington, it was on, that was about the first ones that was dug there, was up north of Addington on some of the...
Was it high quality oil or?
We have never had an oil well right there in Addington. There's been several drilled, but they have been kept off. People often wondered why, but we've never had a producing well right there in Addington.
But they are around.
Oh yes, around there is around us, but not in our little community.
Maybe they just didn't want the oil and what it brings to a community.
Well, maybe so, because they were capped off. And I knew a boy that worked at one of them. He run the bits, I think is what he told me he did. And he said there was oil there, but for some reason they just kept it off. And it's never been reopened.
Were there gas fields? Did you have these gas flares and things?
Well, no, we don't have gas in our community. I mean, no, there's no gas wells around there. I don't guess, none that I remember. There is out around the other part of the country, but
well, did the oil bring in a great boom as it came in, or?
Not to our little town. It didn't. Now over west, why, the little towns boomed pretty good over there, but to our town it didn't. You know.
You were lucky in getting the oil and yet not having the boom.
But see, our town is older than Waurika. Addington is older than Waurika. And I have heard, now I don't know this, you know, I don't...
Not factual.
No, that the reason that we didn't get the... Waurika has the... do you call it where the depot is? It's not a turntable. What is it down here?
Roundhouse.
Roundhouse. They had the roundhouse, you see. And I have been told that we could have had it, but someone that lived in Addington didn't want didn't want the town cluttered up with that stuff or whatever, you know. Now I heard that, you know, and it's probably
well, sometimes it could be that way.
Probably so.
The roundhouse then brought quite a bit of the railroad crew and activity
To Waurika.
How about hotels and things? Did they come in Addington or here?
We had one hotel, and my best friend's mother and father run this hotel. And then we were just, smart alecky little girls, And at that time, the salesmen all rode the train, and carried their little black bags with them, Well, when Nanny and I, that was my girlfriend, when we'd see a train come in, and those salesmen start up, well, we'd run, get in the lobby of the hotel, and we'd sit there. I said, we was really flirting with those salesmen, we was 15 or 16 years old. But I can remember that so.
Well, so many of the small communities, when a boy was old enough to work, he'd go to the larger cities.
Right.
So sometimes it left a kind of the girls had to find their pleasure elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right. Most of them. I said it's always funny that a boy always goes somewhere else to get his girlfriend, and some boy will come into our town and get his girlfriend,
Well, do you have any particular stories or anything now to tell us of some interesting event or something that happened?
Never much interesting around that place.
Tell me something about your food habits when you lived in your childhood days.
Well,
And some of your home remedies that your mother used when you got sick.
well, my grandmother lived with my mother and daddy when I was just a baby. And she kept this sarsaparilla tea sitting on the back of the stove. And I think she made my mother give that to me just ever so often, to keep.
Was it sassafras?
Sassafras.
Mm-hmm.
And she
Yes,
made
they're
my
made from roots.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And she made my mother give me that to keep me from taking diseases. And then another thing she did, aspidity. You remember aspidity? I had to wear some around my neck, and you know how that stunk. But anyway, as I said, when I was growing up, my brother and I, my father owned this grocery store. Well, we had plenty to eat. I mean, never any trouble about that. And then when Mr. Webb and I married, why, the Depression hit, in 31. Well, it hit pretty hard, especially with 8 children. But we did manage
to make it.
Well, we had our own chickens, and we had, everything at home almost, or we couldn't have made it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we gardened, and I canned everything that I could find, And, but then this Jerry that I was telling you about, he's always been such a loving. He had a high temper, but he was all love after all, And he said then we didn't have lunches at the schoolhouse, you see. They had to walk home for their lunch or either take it. Well, mine preferred to walk home. It's just 4 or 5 blocks, so they'd come home. And Jerry said, when I'd start home, I'd say, I know what Mama's going to have for dinner today, red beans and a cobbler. And my cobbler pan, they'd always laughed about it because you know what an old wash pan is. Well, that's what I had one that I made my cobblers in,
Oh, really?
It's one
In
of
a
those
wash
old,
pan?
in one of those old flared out wash pans. But then,
What did you do for colds? Just common colds.
well, they, there was an old remedy that put kerosene on a rag and wrap it around your neck, for all this, that, and the other. But we were pretty fortunate. We had our doctor there, you see, and
So you really
Yeah.
used the doctor's prescriptions on it. A great many people treated themselves, on those things. Mm-hmm. Did you have any serious illnesses or accidents or anything?
One daughter of mine that I told you this baby was born when she was in, she had blood poison in her head in the infection in her head. And we like to have lost her. She was 8 or 9 years old. And seems like we've had a lot of sickness, but I guess we're fortunate not to have had any more than what we did.
Sounds like you're with 8 children. It sounds like you've had a remarkably free life.
You know, I said the Lord had been so good to me. I've had my 8 children, 24 grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren, and never lost any of them.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this interview. We appreciate your story. And we'll be signing off then with Mrs. Ina A. Webb. And this is Mary B. Roberts, this interviewer. I discovered that Mrs. Webb has some interesting materials here, and I've asked her to put part of this on tape for us. Her daughter became interested in the story and history of the postmasters and the post offices of Addington through the years, and she has the entire history of it here. The postmaster and the date of his service.
The first postmaster was Henry A. Baker, and that was November the 4th, 1893.
That was your first one.
The first one. John W. McKinney, February the 25th, 1905.
Still not up to statehood.
No, James Thompson, January 1907. And we became a state in 1907.
Right.
Joseph Huffer, October 19 and 14. Albert Huffer, 19 and 24. Clem Joyce, 19 and 24. Albert Huffer, 19 and 26. Willie C. Brummett, 19 and 54. And Evelyn Webb in 1971.
Now, Evelyn Webb was your
My
daughter.
daughter-in-law.
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 Uh-huh. And she has gotten this from Washington.
Yes, she sent to Washington.
Isn't that
And
interesting?
got this information.
Well, we might want copies of that. I don't know. I'll tell the archives people about them, and we could make copies of them for their files if they want them.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Webb, and I'm so glad you called our attention to that. We might not have known about it.